Hello and welcome back to the Liberty Accelerator channel. My name is Jared H. Smith and I am documenting my journey through this thing the Armed Forces family community refers to as military transition. Today we're doing a deep dive into analysis of the Survivor Benefit Plan. And if you're unfamiliar with the Survivor Benefit Plan, this is actually a type of insurance that applies to all active duty military service members throughout their time in service, and then at the end of the service life, specifically for retirees, they are automatically opted into the Survivor Benefit Plan unless their spouse opts out. And this is particularly for married service members. So we are going to take a fairly slow and deep dive into this financial services review from 2018, and here's the title, as you can see right here. And it focuses on veterans, but it actually, I think what they're saying is the active duty population. It's conducted by 4 people who are in Colorado, a couple at the United States Air Force Academy, and a couple at the University of Colorado. So I'm going to actually be reading this, and then doing some voiceover with respect to their perspective. So millions of defined benefit pensioners must select a pension insurance method. We present a framework for making this decision within the context of U.S. military veterans Survivor Benefit Plan. Federal government subsidies generate a positive expected net payout for the SBP. While insurance outcomes are typically skewed, the asymmetry of SBP outcomes is stark. In a common scenario, 5% of participants receive 60% of benefits. We'll say that again. In a common scenario, 5% of participants receive 60% of the benefits. When said another way, 95% of participants receive 40% of benefits. An alternative financial planning approach incorporates private insurance and investments and often bests the SBP. That means SBP most often times can be beat out by using other private insurance and investments. Actuarially correct life expectancy, moral hazard, taxes, and individual financial needs all play important roles in selecting a pension insurance program. And from the abstract, I want to make sure this is clear. Earlier planning is key on this topic. There's no reason whatsoever that any service member or spouse should be waiting until year 18, 20, or beyond if they are retiring from service to consider the Survivor Benefit Plan. The Survivor Benefit Plan should be incorporated into the Armed Forces family financial planning and wealth strategy upon marriage, if married after entering service, or if married when going into service immediately. There's no reason not to. So, introduction. Tens of millions of people in the United States with defined benefit DB pensions will face a key financial decision when they retire: whether and how to insure their defined benefit pension for their spouse. These insured plans are common among state employees, certain federal employees, and central to this analysis, military veterans, and, once again, active duty specifically. Richwine asserts that about 86% of local and state government employees have defined benefit pensions. There are tens of millions of first responders and state employees, as well as over 1.5 million military members who at retirement can opt for a life insurance product that pays beneficiaries a life annuity upon the insured's death. And quick side note, with respect to the Survivor Benefit Plan for retired United States military service members, this plan covers 55% of the retiree's pension. So if a pensioner has, say, $100,000 coming in on their pension alone, if they're in the Survivor Benefit Plan and they die, the surviving spouse, again, that's key, the surviving spouse would be getting $55,000 a year. And I'm fairly certain that that is taxable pay too, which is a big downfall with respect to this particular program. Also note that Survivor Benefit Plan does not cover the income from VA disability compensation. That's key as well. Now, on with the document. Additionally, although it covers private pensions, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, again, almost 50 years old, ERISA, requires defined benefit plans to provide a survivor's benefit that gives pension payments over both the retirees' and spouses' lifetimes. These programs generally have opt-out features, meaning couples are defaulted into selecting joint benefits but can elect not to pay the cost for the prospective survivor benefits. Consequently, these couples and their advisors require a framework to analyze this key decision. I couldn't agree more. As it stands, the government bureaucracy funnels us all into these programs without the necessary analysis to determine whether or not it's right for us. And frankly, the government shouldn't be doing the analysis for you. It's up to each individual and that armed forces family to be ready to make that decision. And then whenever they're ready to make the decision, if it is to opt out, to do so successfully. Because from the interviews and discussions I've had around this matter from people that have gone before me, the paperwork is set up to where it's easy to screw up and therefore opt you into the program as opposed to getting out of it, even if you want to not opt into it. This article provides such a framework using the U.S. military's pension insurance program as a specific case. One can tailor the approach presented here to any of the tens of millions facing this decision. For military service members, the military pension insurance program is called the Survivor Benefit Plan. For years, the conventional wisdom has been that military retirees should embrace the SBP. Among the reasons to embrace it, it requires no medical exam. It is government-subsidized insurance that implies it is more than actuarially fair. It takes care of surviving spouse and their children for their lifetime in real terms. And as Davis and Frazier 2012 summarize, it can provide substantial risk-free real returns. While these points have merit, the analysis to date are admittedly incomplete. We expand earlier findings with this study and provide a more granular investigation of the survivor benefit plan decision, particularly with respect to military retiree and spouse life expectancies, the skewedness embedded in average returns, and market-based insurance and investment alternatives. So they look at three things. They expand earlier findings with the study, and they provide a more granular investigation of the SBP decision, particularly with respect to military retiree and spouse life expectancies, and this is key later on in the report. The skewedness embedded in average returns, this is key too, as well as market-based insurance and investment alternatives, so basically private sector options that can be incorporated into replacing or augmenting the SBP. We also approach this narrow decision from a holistic financial planning perspective and believe it is imperative that retirees deliberately and thoughtfully consider an SBP-like decision in light of their complete financial planning and life circumstances. And I pseudo-agree with this statement here. It's not imperative that retirees deliberately and thoughtfully consider, because once you're retired, you've either already been opted into it and are in it for at least 2 years, or you have planned well ahead of time and successfully opt out. So it's not a retiree decision, so to speak. It's a active duty decision for the soon-to-be retired. And I believe at the latest, this decision needs to be made at the 15-year mark. And then associated or other options chosen in order to cover what the survivor benefit plan is meant to do. Based on our analysis for a broad swath of the retiring military population, we reached the opposite conclusion of prior studies. That is, we contend SBP is not an ideal approach to pension protection or life insurance. More strongly, our default position would be to recommend against survivor benefit plan unless an individual has a compelling reason or need to select it. Because the survivor benefit plan program is subsidized by the federal government, we posit that other Defined benefit pension recipients could reach the same conclusion when considering their pension insurance options. Finally, because this conclusion is not the default option during the busy time when one is transitioning to retirement, we advocate analyzing one's alternatives in advance of retirement by 2 to 5 years. Again, like I said, I believe 2 years is way too late. 5 years is at best, and more accurately, this conclusion should be come to upon marriage or within 5 years of entering service as a married couple. Before reaching these overarching conclusions, we map the distribution of potential outcomes SBP participants can expect to experience and summarize this comprehensive picture with 3 major findings. 1. The expected returns are more skewed than previously documented, with more than 60% of retirees in a common scenario expected to pay more into SBP than they receive, thus losing wealth. So basically you're augmenting the others who are benefiting from it. You're more likely to not benefit from it and support another family. 2, from a holistic financial planning perspective, survivor benefit plan is largely irrelevant for the most likely mortality scenarios. And 3, in circumstances where survivor benefit plan is most valuable, there exist other life insurance mechanisms to provide similar or even better financial security. And I agree holistically with all 3 of those points. Our article augments current tools available to federal employees making this critical financial decision. The Department of Defense Office of the Actuary maintains a survivor benefit plan calculator on its website that quantifies the expected benefit based on our user customized inputs. Survivor benefit plan tab at actuary.defense.gov. The general takeaway from this calculator is that SBP provides a financially valuable payout to those who subscribe. In contrast, this study provides more context for these calculations and for this important decision. We identify viable alternatives to the survivor benefit plan and provide a novel calculator that allows individuals with unique circumstances to compare our proposed alternative and the survivor benefit plan. And we're going to go and see if they still have this site real quick. www.financialpoints.com. And financialcheckpoints.com. Oh, looks like it's gone. They're not maintaining it anymore, so sorry for your bad luck. All right, background and literature review. I'm going to scroll through and not read this so much. You can pause to read this yourself. But this is basically the research that they did and their sources. If you want to dive deeper, you can for your particular situation. We will go through data and methodology. It is important to recognize that on average, survivor benefit plan insured military officers live longer lives. Just as the Social Security Administration calculates life expectancy tables for general U.S. population, the DoD actuary generates tables for military retirees. Figure 1 shows that military officer retirees have markedly higher survival rates at every age relative to the general population, men and women. While data for first responders are not available to us, we posit that their life expectancy approximate those of military members more closely than those of the general population, given similarities in health screening, physical training, job-related physical requirements, and job-related risk. On the beneficiary side of the equation, it is important to recognize that according to the DoD actuary, military spouses unfortunately do not experience the same expected longevity as the retired military members. Currently, most military retirees are males, 90% plus, and married military members tend to wed non-military spouses, 90+%. So as you can see here, military retirees are healthier, and the survival probability is higher. So you can see here the retired officer in the dark line, retiree spouse in this line here. And overall, the retired officer is going to outlive their retiree spouse. These unbalanced figures aid our analysis because the DoD actuary does not report retiree and spouse tables by gender. Because the vast majority of spouses are female, we can compare SSA female probabilities to military retiree spouses. That's Social Security Administration probabilities to military retiree spouses. Figure 1 shows the probability of survival for military retiree spouses relative to the general population females. Retiree spouses have slightly higher survival probabilities than the Social Security Administration females before age 70, but after age 70 they are comparable. So you can see that here. Because military retirees and their spouses differ from the general population, this warrants an analysis that focuses on their unique life expectancies. Because prior studies use Social Security Administration life expectancy for both military retirees and spouses, they potentially overstate survivor benefit plan value. To illustrate our method and showcase our results, we can use a currently common officer retirement scenario. Our baseline scenario involves a military male retiree age 44 married to a non-military female who is also 44 years old. At this point, a typical officer would have a 20 to 22 year career, while the typical enlisted member would have a 22 to 26 year career. The officer retiree's insured amount is $55,000. We further assume the spouse does not remarry once the service member dies. In fact, if a beneficiary spouse remarries before age 55, the survivor benefit plan payouts cease unless the remarriage ends in divorce or the new spouse dies. We do not incorporate this remarriage probability. The value of the survivor benefit plan would decrease relative to the baseline scenario shown here if remarriage were considered. As for our dollar value calculations, because future survivor benefit plan premiums and payouts adjust with inflation, we do not use a discount factor to adjust them. Finally, given our personal bias, we demonstrate the typical officer retiree calculations, summarize some others, and allow the reader to explore alternative scenarios using an online calculator. Obviously, there are many permutations to the scenario. We summarize a few at the end of the study. So real quick, this is a joint probability of mortality for U.S. military retirees and spouses. This plot shows the joint probability density function for mortality age of U.S. military retirees and their spouses when both are currently age 44, according to the Department of Defense Actuary Office. The military member is male, the spouse is female in this illustration. The highest expected joint probability occurs when the number is age 88 and the spouse is age 89. Okay, that's kind of complicated, but we will move on. Coupling these assumptions with Social Security Administration and DoD life expectancy tables allows us to generate a joint probability density function for expected mortality at any age combination the military retiree and spouse might experience. Figure 2 depicts this joint distribution of our age 44 officer retiree scenario, with the highest or most likely mortality combination occurring when the retiree is 88 and the surviving spouse is 89. As expected, the joint distribution is left skewed toward lower ages given the rather abrupt upper bound on mortality, i.e., in effect, the virtual impossibility of living much beyond 110. For ease of interpretation, most of the subsequent figures incorporate the same basic format and perspective. So here's this joint probability table again. Okay. Results, their conclusions. While the joint life expectancy information is necessary, the payouts associated with these life expectancy combinations is equally important. We calculate these net survivor benefit plan payouts in Figure 3. While we calculate payouts based on $55,000 of retired officer pay, payout calculations are the same on a percentage basis for any retiree because of the percentage-based calculations of survivor benefit plan premiums and payouts. Figure 3 shows absolute amounts for the typical officer retiree. It implements the same X and Y axes as Figure 2. However, it quantifies spouse's payout minus the member's premiums for each retiree spouse mortality combination. For instance, if our 44-year-old military retiree lives to age 50, then he has paid 6 years' worth of survivor benefit plan premiums, or $21,450. Now, this calculation is different this payment for the survivor benefit plan opt-in is different for everyone because it's on a percentage of your retired pay. It's 6.5% of your retirement paycheck of your pension amount is what it costs each armed forces family. So the E6 who retired at 20 years of service or beyond is going to be paying much less than the general officer that retires or admiral who retires at 35 plus years of service. They're gonna the higher rank you are, the higher your 6.5% is going to be, because it's based on your pension payout and not a set amount that applies to everyone. Kind of like SGLI costs $24 a month for anybody. That's not how this works. It's a percentage of your retired pay. If the officer's equivalent age spouse then lives to age 70, she collects 20 years worth of survivor benefit plan payouts, or a total of $605,000. Taking the difference between these payouts and premiums yields a net real payout of approximately $583,550 for the officer who opts for SBP pension protection in this scenario. And recall, you don't have to opt for it. You're automatically opted into it unless the Armed Forces family, and specifically the spouse, opts out of it, because it does take the spouse's notarized signature to opt out of the survivor benefit plan. Figure 3 shows who can expect to win and to lose in strictly financial terms from the survivor benefit plan program. The extreme SBP winners are sadly the spouses of SBP covered military members who die immediately after retiring. As we discuss later, this analysis does not account for the fact that retirees carry their active duty SGLI life insurance coverage for 120 days into retirement at no cost. Again, this is painted as a benefit, SGLI. I advocate that it's anything but. If you have gone more than 5 years into military service and you still have SGLI, the question is why? Why do you still have SGLI? Because SGLI is provided by Prudential Life Insurance, which is a public company, a for-stock company, in fact, that you can go out and get your own term policy from by yourself, and that term policy would extend well beyond your time on active duty. So the question is, why do you have SGLI? All right, well, that's off track. We'll get back on. We hope that the reader understands we put the word winners in quotations for obvious reasons, as we would rather nobody experience this situation. Clearly, the ultimate untimely death of a spouse is a personal and financial catastrophe we wish everyone could avoid. The extreme winning combinations are those in the circled area of Figure 3. The net payout value for officer retirees' spouses in this plot approaches $2 million in extreme cases where a retiree dies immediately. The surviving widow stays single or remarries after age 55, and then she lives well to over 100. So there's the circle he was talking about. The net payoff function for the survivor benefit plan losers has a lower bound at 30 years worth of premiums, $107,250 in our baseline scenario. The maximum negative net payouts, that represents the worst losing situations, occur when the military member pays 30 years worth of survivor benefit plan premiums and the military retiree spouse does not survive the retiree. Using DoD mortality assumptions, this occurs more often than not. In this scenario, where the retiree and spouse are the same age, the probability that the spouse outlives the military retiree is around 42%, markedly lower than almost 60% calculated using these Social Security Administration mortality tables. Yet, this result is not surprising given the survival probability differences shown in Figure 1. The triangle over the trough in Figure 3 highlights the negative payout scenarios. The cost-benefit break-even point for a spouse to recoup all 30 years of premiums is 3.5 years. Actually, 3.55 years. That is $107,250 worth of 30-year premiums divided by $30,250 annual payout for officers. Meaning a spouse must outlive the retiree by approximately 3.5 years to recoup all survivor benefit plan premiums. So that's just a break-even. More generally, for survivor benefit plan payouts to offset premiums paid, i.e. the break-even, at any one point in time, the spouse beneficiary must outlive the insured member by 12% of the total duration that the couple has paid survivor benefit plan premiums. The upward sloping payout on the right side of the triangle represents the mortality combinations where the spouse predeceases the retiree. In these situations, the retiree has paid some premiums but not the full 30 years worth and ceases paying upon the death of his spouse. Having laid the groundwork for understanding joint life expectancy and absolute payoffs, we can now quantify the expected cost versus benefits of the survivor benefit plan program for an officer retiree. This is done by simply multiplying the values in Figures 2 and 3. Doing so yields Figure 4, which plots the expected net payout contour for the couple in our scenario. Visually, the joint life expectancy probabilities dominate the surface relative to the payouts. Because there is a high probability of both a military retiree and his spouse living around 80 years, these probabilities tend to dominate the net gains and losses shown in Figure 3. The likelihood of winning in the SBP, again, the member dying tragically young and spouse living for a long time, is so low that the multi-million-dollar payout scenario scarcely registers. Recognizing that the volume under the curve in Figure 4 represents the aggregate expected value of the survivor benefit plan, in effect, probability times net payout, where sum of probabilities equals 1, some noteworthy observations results. For instance, as the survivor benefit plan program and prior authors have noted, the program is not actuarially neutral. In fact, its expected net payout, in effect, benefits minus premiums, for this scenario is over $61,000. Thus, as many claim, survivor benefit plan is a subsidized program for the benefit of military retirees. Also, the knife edge between winning and losing in the center of the plot stands out. Probabilistically, it is almost a toss-up between whether 1, the retiree dies early enough for a spouse to collect enough survivor benefit plan for a positive net payout represented by the peak, and 2, the retiree either lives too long for his spouse to collect enough SBP or that she predeceases him, represented by the deep depression. We now ask where the survivor benefit plan value comes from and whether that value most effectively addresses the retiree's needs. It turns out that almost 60% of the survivor benefit plan value comes in an expanded definition of who are the survivor benefit plan winners. Specifically, let us expand the definition of winners to include those scenarios where the military retiree dies before age 66 and his spouse lives at least 10 years more. In other words, the retiree dies relatively young and the spouse then survives for at least another decade. While this particular scenario occurs less than 5% of the time, it represents almost 60% of the survivor benefit plan total expected value. Stated differently, for a common retiree spouse scenario, non-winners represent over 95% of the scenarios, but only collect 40% of the expected survivor benefit plan benefit. The returns to SBP are exceedingly skewed toward those who die relatively young and have long-lived surviving spouses who do not remarry. A minority of people get more back than they spend, and a very select few get exceedingly high returns. There is over a 60% probability that SBP participants will pay more into the SBP program than they ever receive, despite its federally subsidized status. This finding surprises us, given that when asked, quote, "Is SBP a good buy?" close quote, the Military Pay and Benefits website sponsored by the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness responds, "The answer for most retirees is yes." Go figure, right? A government bureaucrat response to a very general question. Having defined the winner as a low odds 1 in 20 scenario, we now expand the definition and determine who are the usual winners of SBP. These are couples in which the military retiree dies after age 66, i.e. dies later, and the spouse then lives at least 12% longer than the retiree has been retired, in effect to get past the break-even point discussed earlier. Because these are more likely outcomes, it is critical to consider these cases. By age 67, a beneficiary spouse will have Social Security options and often other savings, retirement and other, and perhaps a pension from the spouse's own job. As a result, the SBP decision becomes one of the marginal wealth. That is, given the couple's other endowments or savings and income, Social Security and pension, will the marginal survivor benefit plan protection be necessary in the most probable situations? We contend the answer to this question is probably not. Thus, our results directly counter the argument that one should buy SBP because the expected return to SBP is positive. Note that we do not contend pension insurance is universally a bad idea. Rather, in contrast to prior findings, we argue that the default position should be against SBP based strictly on the financial calculations, so long as other alternatives exist. So, again, a voiceover about other alternatives. This comes down to a family readiness situation and planning much earlier in service than we typically do around specifically our life insurance and investments. And that way, it's a no-brainer to opt out of SBP because you've already planned for other options. 5. Alternatives to SBP. If not survivor benefit plan or any analogous pension insurance, then what? Given the statistical unlikelihood of winning the SBP or even experiencing the previously advertised positive expected return, what is a military retiree to do to protect his or her family? After all, it would be imprudent to forego pension protection in the early retirement years, which programs like SBP provide. And the typical military member remains poised and inevitably wants to act on this information provided here. Fortunately, there are some alternatives to consider. So invest for the long term. This is beyond the scope of our discussion here, but I would caution you against Buy term and invest the rest. The 1970s approach to financial planning has put very many in a very dangerous and risky position in index funds and the typical retirement savings vehicles perpetuated by Wall Street. That's for another discussion, but I caution you against the typical status quo. Learn more about that inside the Liberty Accelerator program. Buy term and invest the difference, just talked about that. So feel free to pause this and read this stuff as I go. This is important too. Caveats and additional considerations. We have presented a scenario based on analysis using the most common officer retirement scenario. This means unambiguously that our recommendations are not one size fits all, as are none of these discussions, right? Every individual family is different, and considerations must be made with informed experts, what I call a Liberty Power team. Instead, they come with the following caveats and additional considerations. The online calculator provides individual-specific insights that this paper does not depict, which we've already determined that the calculator is not available. Competent financial planning. First and foremost, survivor benefit plan decision is a tactical one that is part of an individual's and family's broader financial strategy. Having a comprehensive strategy is absolutely critical, and the survivor benefit plan decision should complement this bigger picture. It would be tragic to see destitute or widows and widowers win the tactical financial skirmish but lose the broader campaign. I agree with that. There's a transition war here, and your own family is fighting its own individual battle. Are you going to do it on a team, or are you going to fight it alone and afraid? Taxes. As mentioned earlier, our analysis ignores taxes. The basis for the decision is that SBP premiums are paid pre-tax, yet benefits are taxed. This is huge. This is huge. Benefits are taxed. Frankly, there's no other insurance out there where you're going to be taxed on the insurance payout, but not the case for Uncle Scam's survivor benefit plan. Conversely, term life insurance payments are taxed. The proceeds are not. The tax status of investments varies based on whether they are in tax advantage retirement accounts or not, and if so, which flavor. Examples given: traditional or Roth. For these reasons, we urge readers to perform a specific situation tax analysis before making any financial decisions. And you're recommended to talk with a tax accountant for that specific item. Personal differences. Clearly, our scenario-based analysis analyzes a particular couple. Again, we understand it to be the most common officer retiree scenario in as much as one exists. Obviously, the individual retiree and spouse health at retirement varies, and the couple's mortality expectations can deviate significantly, both positively and negatively, from the actuarial table estimates. For instance, because of a medical condition, it is possible the retiree cannot get private insurance. One needs to make this determination before declining SBP. And again, I state, it's possible the retiree cannot get private insurance. Well, why did we wait until retirement was here to look at other insurance options? This is a reactionary mode the Armed Forces family is putting themselves in because they've had Uncle Sam coddling them for 20 years or more. We need to be looking at these things much earlier in service. And I would argue that to take care of your people, one thing to take care of your people is to ensure they're aware of this particular issue and that they don't need to be using the Base Family Readiness Center for their financial planning in service, because it's not looking at preparations for far beyond service either. 6.4 age differences. Marked age differences can certainly swing this analysis in favor of the survivor benefit plan decision, particularly if the retiree is a male married to a much younger female spouse. In that case, it is more likely that the male retiree will predecease his spouse, generating much higher expected payouts to a spouse beneficiary. Figure 6, as well as our online calculator, can help here. 6.5, children. Along similar lines as the previous caveat, retirees with young children can consider opting for the child-only benefit portion of the survivor benefit plan. This a la carte option permits the retiree to buy a survivor benefit plan at a very low rate, an example given on the order of $10 to $20 per month, with children as the beneficiaries. Eligible children share the full 55% benefit equally until they turn 18 or 22 if a student, at which time they become ineligible. If both spouse and child benefits are elected, then children are not eligible for these benefits until the spouse is ineligible through marriage or death. In short, when a retiree's youngest child is very young, the survivor benefit plan child option can serve as an inexpensive partial substitute for the private insurance coverage and the term and invest option we present. Notably, untabulated analysis shows that child-only coverage is not actuarially favorable to participants. However, the premiums can be a small price to pay for the peace of mind this coverage provides. 6.6. The talk. As discussed early on, the survivor benefit plan is an opt-out program. A married member who wishes to decline coverage must get the spouse's approval, whereby the spouse recognizes its decision to forego the annuity upon the member's death. Anecdotally, we cannot overstate the difficulties associated with this decision if a couple has not had prior conversations about their plans. As part of this talk, a spouse must recognize the potential implications of foregoing survivor benefit plan. For instance, if a couple declines survivor benefit plan and subsequently divorces, the spouse could lose control over the insurance and investments unless they protect themselves carefully in the divorce proceedings. It is important the spouse recognizes potential liability. Narrowly, we recommend conversing with one spouse early about the survivor benefit plan decision. More broadly, we encourage couples to discuss general financial planning matters early and often. But to do so, you got to be informed and intentionally discussing this stuff with experts and SMEs who understand it and can apply their expertise to your unique wealth planning situation. Again, waiting until what I call the transition battle to have these discussions, and all of a sudden the spouse is in a fight or flight mode, and the easy answer is to opt in. But as they lay out in this report, it's an extremely costly one, and one that most likely will not pay off for your family in the long term. 6.7. Investment and budgetary discipline. Discussing this article with others, including insurance sales representatives, made us consider putting this item first on the list. As one astute reviewer highlighted, the term and invest alternative depicted here relies on the investment component of the strategy, particularly later on when returns are compounded over decades. Behaviorally, it takes discipline to keep investing the difference versus enhancing one's quality of life. Unfortunately, for some individuals, it is very easy to stop paying a term policy premium or stop investing the difference if a new car or house upgrade beckons. If a couple is not committed to investing the difference, they might consider SBP more carefully. Despite the low return, in effect risk-free rate assumptions in our scenario, the investments represent fully 75% of the term and invest strategy's value. Thus, a term insurance only strategy underperforms survivor benefit plan, which is not surprising given the survivor benefit plan subsidy. The real surprise is that a competitively priced life insurance policy from a reputable insurer competes quite well with the SBP at this time. Furthermore, if allowed to deviate from risk-equivalent returns, a broad market portfolio of investments may perform much better over decades than shown in our analysis. And again, caveat here, they're talking about over decades since the 1970s. If you look at the typical 60-40 portfolio split return over the last 110 years or so, that's a very dangerous game to play. Additionally, a beneficiary of a lump sum insurance payout requires budgetary discipline to ensure the funds last as if they were an annuity. Financial advisors can assist with this discipline aspect. Again, see the first recommendation. 6.8. Assumptions. We make known our assumptions about our scenario, interest rates, and inflation. However, we must add this item for completeness. Of course, the outcomes are sensitive to these assumptions. Caveated sufficiently, we do stress that the essence of our recommendations are not highly sensitive to changes in these assumptions. Marital status. The younger a widower or widow, the more likely he or she is to remarry. Figure 7 shows these probabilities. If an SBP recipient widower remarries before age 55, SBP benefit disappears. Consequently, if we added these probabilities of remarriage into this analysis, the expected payout to the winners, i.e. the long-lived spouse whose SBP insurance spouse died young, would decrease. Adding the caveat would, on balance, enhance the appeal of the term and invest strategy relative to SBP. For divorced retirees, Hidgen outlines multiple family law cases involving SBP. Another application of this analysis results from these legal situations. Divorced service members might find a level term life insurance policy a more financially appealing way to provide for their ex-spouse's insurance interest in the service member's retirement pay. 6.10. Credit quality both ways. Directly comparing our term and invest strategy with SBP assumes the private insurer has credit quality equal to the U.S. government. We could avoid this assumption by adjusting the insurance payouts with a discount rate reflecting this risk. We have chosen not to do so at this time because 1, the private insurers we quote have top ratings, and 2, we do not think using such a discount rate would necessarily obviate any related criticism. 6.11. Female military member. I'm not going to read this, but a slightly different case for a female military member and a non-military spouse. And then a whole nother discussion is a dual military couple, and that's for another day. So the death indemnity compensation offset and service members group life insurance is also a consideration. We're not going to get into that here today. Conclusion: tens of millions of retirees, state employees, federal employees, and even private defined benefit pensioners face decisions about whether and how to insure their defined benefit pension. Again, I advocate for planning for this much earlier in life and not at the end when the pension is about to begin. If you're making the decision then, you've waited way too late, and you need to warn all those coming behind you that they need to look at this today. The U.S. military has a transparent and well-defined pension protection program called the Survivor Benefit Plan. The Survivor Benefit Plan presents a unique opportunity to present a framework for analyzing this key financial decision. Prior analysis has simulated the payoffs for various scenarios, ultimately concluding that the Survivor Benefit Plan's average real return is quite remarkable, between 6 and 7% for a common scenario. While we concur that this average return makes the SBP program very attractive, we update the results using more relevant and appropriate life expectancy data. We show that a 1 in 20 winner scenario is embedded in any rate of return calculation, masking the highly skewed distribution of outcomes. We ultimately recommend a default position against the federally insured pension protection program for the typical retiree given currently available market alternatives. That is as of 2018. And I would reiterate here in early 2022 that that's the same. The Armed Forces family needs to understand that SBP covers them during their service time at no cost, and then will automatically opt them into a cost of 6.5% of their pension for at least 2 years, and if you go beyond 36 months, then for the rest of the service member's life. One alternative that is currently more appropriate for the typical military retiree considering SBP-like programs is to buy privately available level financial services products out on the open market and do so much earlier in service. Again, this report keeps harping on the buy term, invest the rest philosophy, which I no longer agree with. Based on an illustration of a common retiree spouse combination and risk equivalent return assumptions, a strategy of buying term insurance and investing the savings generally provides more preferred outcomes than Survivor Benefit Plan. Again, I don't agree with that. Our analysis couples the Department of Defense actuary life expectancy tables with realistic demographic and economic assumptions to first determine the expected payoff to the Survivor Benefit Plan program. It turns out that over 60% of SBP clients should expect to pay more in premiums than they ever receive. While we might anticipate this breadth of expected negative returns with private insurers because of profit and overhead requirements, it is somewhat surprising given the SBP is federally subsidized and endorsed. Further, the SBP insures relatively healthy individuals, U.S. military members who have served at least 20 years, as evidenced by their required preventative health exams and routine physical fitness tests. This study further characterizes the expected Survivor Benefit Plan winners versus typical recipients, finding that while the winners, in effect the insured dies young and the beneficiary lives long, occur only a fraction of the time, 5% of the time. Almost 60% of the SBP's expected value goes to the surviving spouse in these couples. Again, 5% of the couples. In contrast, the typical SBP recipients receive their payouts relatively late in the game for relatively few years, at a time when they likely have other sources of income besides the SBP annuity. For these reasons, we explore an alternative to SBP, which is buying term insurance and investing the difference between the cost of the term policy and the SBP premium. Once again, I don't concur with buy term and invest the rest any longer. It's a new age, it's a new market, it's no longer the 1970s or 80s or 90s or 2000s. This term and invest strategy can be superior to SBP in many situations, again in the past, not today. It protects the surviving spouse from an unexpected early death of the insured retiree. Unlike SBP, the term insurance policy benefits are not conditional upon the beneficiary spouse's mortality. In other words, children, charities, or retiree's estate will still benefit if the retiree spouse passes away. The investments also provide a certain benefit to the spouse, children, or couple, whether the retiree predeceases them early or not. In fact, in a common scenario of a 44-year-old male military officer retiring with great health and under plausible nominal investment return, 7%, and inflation, 2.5% assumptions, and this is a terrible assumption. 2.5% inflation assumption is atrocious. It was atrocious in 2018 as well, because they're going off of the widely reported Bureau of Labor Statistics yearly inflation amount of 2.5%. And looking back over the last decade, you can see that that's just simply not the case. real inflation rates have hovered anywhere from 5% to 15%, especially in the 2021 and 2022 timeframes, even exceeding that 10 to 15 and 20% mark in certain areas of necessary spending. But back on track. The expected payout to a term and invest strategy is $330,000, which is over 5 times the expected payout from SBP. A summary of various scenarios is found in Figure 6, which comes from our calculator that used to be provided online. In closing, it is universally important to recognize certain things about SBP. 1, the expected returns are more skewed than previously documented. 2, well over one half of retirees' income situations are expected to pay more in premiums than their spouse collects. 3, from a holistic financial planning perspective, the most likely mortality scenarios make SBP largely irrelevant. And lastly, in circumstances where SBP is most valuable, there exist other mechanisms to provide similar or even enhanced financial security. I agree with this, and they focus on buy term and invest the rest in this article. I disagree with that approach. Yet, because of the caveats we list, which includes taxes, individual unique circumstances, behavioral considerations, our assumptions, and so forth, the SBP decision is truly situation specific, and hence the need for your Liberty Power team to fully inform you much earlier than we typically look at this decision. Therefore, we recommend readers use this article's framework as a baseline for discussing this important topic with their own clients or planners before making a potentially life-altering decision. We recommend having this conversation 2 to 5 years before retirement. For our part, we are eating our own cooking. Those of us who are eligible have purchased term life policies and declined SBP. And then there's the resources and references. So you can go do your own research if you need to. So, again, Financial Services Review. I had to get this off of a academic database. It's not widely available out there. You can't go Google this and find it because it's behind firewalls. I do offer a copy of it inside my Liberty Accelerator program for you to download and view, or you can fight through this 45-minute video to consume it yourself. All right then, that's all for this episode of the Liberty Accelerator Transition Insights, and we will see you next time. To your liberty, heck yeah.